The story begins in a dark room where a coffin is in the middle. Suddenly, the coffin opens, and a man dressed in black comes out of it. The man opens the windows with his magical powers and goes out on the terrace, from where he takes a brief look at the outside world, and suddenly, he changes his clothes into a white school uniform with his powers. After some while, when he is walking down the road, the girls are amazed by his looks, and everyone wonders who this handsome man is. He goes in front of the school while other students are running to the gate because they are late, and meanwhile, a red-haired guy behind him tells him that there is no time to waste like this because Park is guarding the gate. Suddenly, when he looks at that boy, he wonders who this handsome guy is, but as he gets late, he runs towards the school and tells him to rush, otherwise, he'll be late. When the handsome guy reaches the gate of Iran High School, he hears Voila asking the students why they are late when he is at the entrance and says he can't let his class students go easy. Voila punishes the students who are late, and when he hits Shinwoo Han with a stick because he is late again, the other students start laughing. Shinwoo feels embarrassed because Yuna is also there. Voila punishes all of them to do 5 laps, but when the students request him to reduce their punishment, Voila says if Shinwoo runs 7 laps, others can run 3 laps. Shinwoo agrees to do that for Yuna, and when others complete 3 laps, Voila sends them to their class. Meanwhile, the handsome boy enters the gate, but Voila gets furious to see him arriving so late. Voila says for a second there, he didn't even think this boy was tardy because he is so confident. But suddenly he realizes he has never seen him before. While Voila is checking the newcomer, Shinwoo completes his 7 laps, and he recognizes he has seen this newcomer a while ago. When Voila also says he doesn't know this student, Shinwoo wonders if he is a transfer student. When Voila asks if the handsome boy is new here, the boy nods, so Voila, with a smirk, says he should have told him earlier and asks which school he is from. When the boy doesn't reply, Voila asks who taught him these manners to answer with a nod and gets mad at him for not answering his questions. Suddenly, the boy speaks a different language, which Shinwoo and Voila can't understand. Still, when Shinwoo asks Voila what the newbie said, Voila replies the newbie is from far away, and guesses he lives overseas. Shinwoo says his looks are Korean enough, but something feels slightly off, so he asks if he is possibly of mixed descent or a foreigner. When that guy nods again, Shinwoo says they are correct, and the teacher tells Shinwoo that this guy has an entirely different vibe than Shinwoo because he has taller legs than Shinwoo. Suddenly, Park says Shinwoo will be responsible for taking this student to the chairman, and then he leaves. When Voila starts walking away, Shinwoo says he can't leave like this, but then he tells the newbie to come with him and takes him to the chairman's office, where the chairman is enjoying his coffee. Chairman tells Shinwoo to come in and ask what brings him there and if he is in trouble again, to which Shinwoo it's not like this, and he has brought a transfer student because the teacher told him to do so. Chairman thanks Shinwoo and tells him to get to his class before it's too late, so Shinwoo leaves and, while leaving, tells the newbie to go inside. Meanwhile, the chairman checks the documents and thinks it's odd because there is no transfer student. But when the newbie gets in, the chairman is shocked to see him. The newbie says it's been a while and calls the chairman by his name, Frankenstein. Frankenstein gets on his knees to see his master, but his master tells him to get up. When Frankenstein asks how he has been, the guy replies he just woke up and asks how long he was in the sleeping coffin. Frankenstein doesn't know when his master went to sleep, but they last saw him 820 years ago. He says they searched everywhere after the master disappeared but were incompetent in finding him, so he apologizes. The master thinks he has been asleep for so many years, and Frankenstein also feels the same and decides to investigate everything, including how his master ended up walking there. Frankenstein worryingly asks how his master is coping with language since he was asleep for so long, to which the master replies there is no problem with his abilities and he'll get used to it like he always does. Frankenstein says it's good to hear this, but suddenly he notices his master should have chosen something most casual when he returns to the world but wonders why he is wearing the school uniform. The master says the gatekeeper is quite impressive, and when he asks if Frankenstein is leading a specific family while he is asleep, Frankenstein replies that this place is called a school, where they teach students and guide their way. The master says he would have to get to know the present world, and Frankenstein says he'll ensure the master doesn't have any trouble adjusting here. After some while, Park takes the new student to the class, and when he sees students in an awe, he thinks it's not the first time he has seen students react like this. Park remembers on orientation day, Frankenstein congratulated all the new students starting at Iran High School, and said his school considers free will the most crucial aspect, and he hopes the students spend a wonderful time there for the next 3 years. When the speech ended, all the students were sad because the chairman's speech ended, and Park wondered what kind of school students were disappointed that the chairman's speech was over. Park remembers that the chairman told him that the new student had lived overseas and it was his first time in Korea, so he wouldn't know about their culture. He told Park to understand if the newbie behaved badly with him because he didn't mean it with bad intentions. A while later, Park introduces the new student to the students and tells them he was born and raised abroad, and as it's his first time in Korea, the students should help him with the culture and things. When the newbie tells his name, the students can't understand what he is saying, so they ask their teacher, but Park also doesn't know what the newbie said. Suddenly, the newbie replies his name is Kardi's Atrama Dai Razel, which is his name in Korean, but Shinwoo thinks about what's with this long name and is shocked that he can speak Korean. Park is also shocked that Kardi's can speak Korean, but Kardi's replies he is not fluent, but everyone thinks he sounds completely fluent. Park says he has a long name, so he asks for the first and last name, but Kardi's replies all of it is the first and last name, and they can call him whatever they want. Suddenly, Shinwoo tells Park that Kardi's is not addressing him as a teacher or sir, and Park also thinks he never even noticed that Kardi's was speaking to him so informally. Park remembers what the chairman said to him and believes that the chairman asked him for the favor personally, and he didn't even catch it in the first place, so he can't be harsh on Kardi's. Shinwoo also says Kardi's doesn't know because he is probably from another country, and says it's a misunderstanding that anyone new to their culture could make, so he considers that only 5 minutes of Park's arm bar would be sufficient. Park furiously asks if Shinwoo would take it for Kardi's because he wants to use this technique on him, so Shinwoo quietly sits down. Park tells Kardi's that in Korea they use honorifics and formal speech to show respect, which applies in a variety of situations and applies to people older than him. Seeing the look on Kardi's face, Park thinks he didn't get it, and he can also not get mad at him, so he decides to discuss it later and tells him to take the empty seat behind Shinwoo. After some while, in another lecture, when a teacher asked why Shinwoo was sitting without a book, Shinwoo said the transfer student didn't bring his book, so they were sharing. But when the teacher asked why 3 students were sharing one book, Shinwoo said he also doesn't bring his textbook either. During the next class, Shinwoo gets bored, but when he sees Kardi's has not changed postures or expressions since the class started, he wonders if he isn't bored. Meanwhile, Kardi's looks carefully at Iken sitting on his right who is using a laptop, and Shinwoo thinks the only thing Kardi's is doing is to glimpse over occasionally. Shinwoo wonders why Iken-woo is going crazy with the mouse when taking notes and thinks he is typing with his mouse. Shinwoo believes there is a strange vibe about the new guy, and the kids from other classes come over during recess, but can't talk to Kardi's due to his vibe. Shinwoo knows Kardi's is handsome, but he thinks no matter how attractive he is, why does he have to receive such glares from the girls in his class? Shinwoo believes it's unfair because he could win and grin at all, but he can't bear Yuna looking at Kardi's. On the other hand, Frankenstein visits where his master is sleeping and thinks the building was built 4 months ago and purchased by someone last month. Frankenstein knows that no one lives in this place, and the person who bought this place also doesn't exist. Everything was planned out thoroughly, but no one would have known his master was sleeping in there, which also goes for him. Frankenstein wonders how much was a coincidence and how much was planned, and wonders if someone is involved from the persons he knows. After some while, Frankenstein reports to his master that he checked out the place where his master woke up and that the building was newly built and purchased only recently. Frankenstein says it seems the owner of the building doesn't exist and believes this person wanted to remain anonymous and purchased the building for a specific purpose. Frankenstein says the only thing that stood out was the coffin Kardi's stayed in, and no one should have known he was in slumber there. Frankenstein says since Kardi's chose the holy site of his slumber right before he entered it, no one from some specific persons could have been related to this situation from the beginning. However, it would have been an entirely different matter if even one of them was involved, and Kardi's says those people must have gone through many changes during his slumber. Kardi's thinks they have all grown much larger and more secretive, but the faction that has changed the most is that of humans, and though they were once the weakest, they now seem stronger than all others. Kardi's says the faction that others have always overshadowed has overcome its limits numerous times, and since they are systematically incorporated into society, its influence is quite impressive. Frankenstein tells Kardi's that he didn't return to that place after Kardi's disappeared, so he is unfamiliar with the details of the specific people's development. But now, since Cardes is awake, Frankenstein decides to keep a closer eye on their movements and plans to go to the bottom of this incident as well. Frankenstein thinks their master's nonchalant attitude has not changed and asks him how his class was, to which Cardes replies it was a new experience for him. Cardes tells Frankenstein that it seems he has a problem with his powers, and Frankenstein asks if it could be because he was asleep for too long. Frankenstein knows that a master can connect with the minds of others, and he may not understand foreign words immediately, but his ability allows him to understand what they mean and pick up other languages incredibly quickly. Frankenstein thinks the master has problems with this ability, but Cardes tells him it is in maths class. Frankenstein thinks about how he will explain those complicated formulas to the master. Cardes says the gatekeeper was teaching maths, and he is impressed by the gatekeeper and says from the moment he saw him, he knew the gatekeeper was not ordinary. At night, 3 people visit the place where Cardes' coffin is, but one of them is shocked to see no coffin there and tells the others that he left the coffin here a few days ago and no one had any clue about it. The guy asks the others to give him some time, and he'll recover the coffin, but one of the other guys, who is vampire, sucks the guy's blood and kills him, while the other vampire says he thought they would find the coffin that was intercepted, but now things have become more complicated. The vampire says the dead guy told them that the coffin was exceptional, so he decides to stay. And when the other vampire asks if he can clean the dead body from there, his fellow vampire tells him to leave it there. The following day, during lunchtime, Shinwoo asks why Cardes is not eating, and if it could be he didn't bring his lunch. But when Cardes doesn't reply, Shinwoo thinks he also has not got lunch money. Shinwoo says it's okay if Cardes doesn't bring his books, but tells him that he has to eat and says Cardes is worse than him as he has no textbook, bag, money, or food. Shinwoo says he at least brought his bag and lunch money and tells Cardes to follow him as his lunch is on him. But suddenly, the Iken tells Shinwoo to wait up because he also left his wallet at home. Shinwoo says it's alright and tells them to follow him. They all go to the cafeteria, and Shinwoo orders ramyeon for him and his fellows. After that, they sit at the table. The girls start crushing over Cardes, but Shinwoo thinks it's the same response everywhere, and simultaneously, their order gets ready. Shinwoo brings the order to the table and tells Cardes that the ramyeon is pretty good, but when he picks up chopsticks, Cardes remembers how humans used to kill vampires with the stake of judgment. Cardes says he will not fall for this, but Shinwoo tells him to dig in and eat it with kimchi because ramen tastes best. When Cardes is going to taste it, he smells garlic and remembers humans used it as a poison against them, but says this won't work for him. When Shinwoo tells him to eat and stop mumbling, Cardes asks if there is more, but Shinwoo yells that the noodles are absorbing the soup and he should start eating this. At night, the vampires searching for the coffin think that it's not easy to locate that coffin, and that they should have interrogated that guy more before eating it. One of them says he is sure a fool like that guy would not know anything else, and becoming his friend's food was the last that person could do. The vampire who ate the guy says it's entertaining, and he is somewhat put off by the fact that they were sent on this simple mission, so he asks if his friend knows who sent them. His friend replies he doesn't know, and, like always, they can kill anybody who gets in their way. But when the vampire asks about the guy whom he bit, his friend guesses that guy is just about to come because it's been 24 hours since he has been bitten, so he'll have to move fast. The vampire says in 3 hours, that person's body will break down, and he'll be able to eat in 3 hours, so he won't starve to death, and the place they are right now is peaceful enough for that person to get some food. After school, when Yuna is going home, she sees a guy in an alley in bad condition, so she decides to check on him. But when the guy turns back, she is shocked to see his terrifying face. Meanwhile, Shinwoo, Cardes, and Iken are going home, and while Shinwoo and Iken are talking about their match, they ask Cardes to play them next time. Shinwoo can't believe Cardes sat there for 3 hours and watched them play, so he says he can teach Cardes next. Suddenly, they hear a scream, and Iken wonders what's the voice. They notice Shinwoo running towards it because he recognizes it's Yuna's voice. Shinwoo immediately reaches that alley, and he sees a guy holding Yuna's arm, so he instantly kicks that guy away. Meanwhile, Cardes and Iken also arrive, and Cardes understands that the guy is a vampire. But when that guy gets up again, Shinwoo wonders what is wrong with that guy because he is sure he got him pretty hard. They are shocked to see his red eyes, and Shinwoo thinks he is about to shoot lasers from his eyes. Iken tells Shinwoo that there is something off with this guy, and Yuna also agrees with Iken, so Shinwoo picks up a garbage drum, and after throwing it on that guy, he tells everyone to turn. While they run away, Cardes keeps standing there, but Shinwoo returns to drag Cardes along, and they continue running. After they leave, the other vampires appear, and one of them says they came by just in case, but they never thought they would see something so interesting. The vampire says this new fool vampire is more robust than average humans, although he has not eaten yet. But to see him so powerless against that kind is interesting, and that kid's movements were something else. Suddenly, the vampire notices Shinwoo left his bag there, so he tells the new vampire to search for it and find out who knocked him down. The vampire empties Shinwoo's bag and finds some martial arts books. On the other hand, after running for some while, they all stop to catch their breaths, and Iken asks others what was that guy with crazy eyes and he looks weird. Shinwoo says he also saw that guy with 2 laser eyes, but Iken says he is talking nonsense because it was probably just the light reflecting off his bloodshot eyes. Still, Iken thinks that the guy shooting lasers from the eyes is not normal and asks Yuna if she is alright, to which she replies she is fine and thanks Iken. When Iken tells her he didn't do anything, Shinwoo heard her scream and reacted right away. She thanks Shinwoo because if he had not come, something would have happened to her. Yuna thanks Cardi's by calling him Rai because all the girls call him that, and Rai replies she can call him whatever she wants. Suddenly, they ask Rai where he lives and wonder if it must be nearby. Instead of responding to them, Rai gives them a card that Frankenstein gave him to use whenever he is in trouble. All of them are shocked to see it's a picture of Frankenstein, and some message is written on its back. After some while, they are all sitting inside the chairman's house, and Frankenstein says he was not expecting visitors, so all he has to offer is tea and tells them to make themselves at home. The students thank the chairman and ask if Rai is staying with him, to which Frankenstein replies that he knows Rai personally, so he'll be staying with him. Frankenstein says he is surprised to see them all together till this late, to which Iken replies that they were spending time with Rai at the internet cafe. Iken tells Frankenstein that they met Yuna when she was in trouble, and when Frankenstein asks about the problem, Iken says they were walking when they heard Yuna's scream, so Shinwoo got there first and attacked the guy who was trying to snatch Yuna and got her away from him. Frankenstein says that man won't be able to walk around for a while because Shinwoo wouldn't have gone easy on a man like that. But Iken says that was what he thought as well, but that man just got right back up as if he was never hit. Shinwoo says he kicked that guy as hard as he could and felt the full impact through his foot, but it was insulting how much that guy seemed unaffected. They tell Frankenstein that the man's eyes and teeth looked like an animal's, and his face was pale as if he were sick. He was skinny and gave off a weird vibe. Iken says that, luckily, Yuna wasn't hurt, and they ran away after Shinwoo took him down, which makes Frankenstein worried. Suddenly, Shinwoo tells Frankenstein to make sure Rai has some lunch money from now on because he had to buy him lunch that day. Frankenstein thinks he is doomed. He starts sweating in fear of his master and gets worried about what he has done. On the other hand, the other vampires are discussing that the newly transformed vampire is having his meal somewhere, and they say it looks like he succeeded this time. Meanwhile, Frankenstein tells Rai that he had his secretary drive the children home and says something is bothering him about their story. Frankenstein asks if the man who attacked Yuna is a vampire and says he hesitates to make any conclusions. But there is this mystery of his master's situation as well, so he is a bit bothered by it. Frankenstein says, as Master knows, in the beginning, all that the humans wanted from their treaty was to protect themselves and their interests. However, things have changed now that the humans have gotten stronger. It's to the degree that vampires regulate themselves from attacking humans to avoid being exposed to humans. And that's why vampires are unknown to ordinary people, unlike in the old days. Frankenstein wonders if the vampires have chosen to break that rule and attack a human, especially in a highly populated area where they'll be easily exposed. But Rai says he doesn't know if that guy is a vampire. What Rai felt was rage and hunger that was incomparable to that of the ones he had known before. But Frankenstein thinks if that guy was a vampire, there is no way his master would not have recognized him as one. But he knows his master didn't deny it as well. Frankenstein suspects something is happening and master may be involved, so he decides to get to the bottom of this as soon as possible. Frankenstein gives Rai some notes on living in the 21st century and apologizes to Rai because he should have taken care of his meal. When Rai says it was his first time trying the food here, but it is to his liking, Frankenstein is glad to hear that and also gets relieved to hear that Rai likes the school. The next day, students are waiting for the teacher when an announcement is made that a horrible incident occurred near their school, and they advise the students to immediately go home after school from now on until there is further notice. The students are advised to stay away from the remote areas as much as possible and stay with their friends on the way home. While Shinwoo wonders what horrible incident would have happened, Park arrives and tells the students that the police asked for the school's help to make sure the students go home right away to avoid danger. When Shinwoo asks what happened, Park says he heard it was a homicide. The police had no information on the suspect yet and were told that it didn't seem to be an ordinary case of homicide. Park tells Shinwoo, Yuna, Ikun, and Rai to go to the chairman's office, and when they go there, Frankenstein tells them to have a seat. Frankenstein says as they all heard about the incident, there was a chance that the man they mentioned yesterday could be one of the suspects, so the four of them had to be careful, and that's why he asked them to come to his office to make sure no one got hurt yesterday. When all of them are assured they are fine, Frankenstein says he is glad to hear that, and he thinks if anyone is injured, they have been injured, they would not have been walking around like this. Meanwhile, something is bothering Ikun, and he wants to tell Frankenstein, so when the chairman tells them to feel free to say anything, Ikun asks if the murder weapon is a trash can by any chance, because if so, then Shinwoo is the killer. Everyone feels disappointed by this nonsense question of Ikun, and Shinwoo asks the chairman where the trash can is in his room. After school, Ikun tells Shinwoo that his neck still hurts, and Shinwoo tells him to be grateful because he got off with a headlock and asks if Ikun thinks he is a high school detective. After some while, Yuna thanks them for walking her home, but Ikun says it's not a problem because they all live in the same neighborhood. Shinwoo says the chairman lives near them so Rai can tag along with them, and Rai nods. When Ikun asks if Shinwoo thinks the man from last night is the killer, Shinwoo believes there is no way it's possible. But still, seeing how school let them go after only early morning classes, there must be something strange about this case. Yuna says if the man from the last night is the killer, then the killer would have been free. But Ikun tells her that's probably not the case because that man couldn't even fight back against Shinwoo. Shinwoo tells Yuna that he'll walk home with her till they catch the culprit so she doesn't have to worry, and Yuna thanks them for making her feel better. Shinwoo suggests going to the internet cafe because it's still early and an hour won't hurt, and says he'll teach Yuna and Rai how to play the game. On the other hand, the vampires who are searching for the coffin think it's a wild goose chase, and they know a delicate investigation was never their specialty. One of them suggested that if they went after everyone near that building, they could probably get a lead. Still, the other vampire tells his friend to forget it because the higher-ups will probably give them another order if they play around there a bit more. When that vampire says he may have found something fun for them to do, he points at some school students wearing the same uniform they saw the student was wearing last night. The vampire says the newly transformed vampire hiding in the drains from the sun may do something to entertain them, and meanwhile, that vampire hiding in the drain is thinking about killing Shinwoo. The students went to the internet cafe an hour ago to play a game, but Yuna noticed Rai was not turning on his computer. Ikun tells Yuna that Rai only watched them play last time, but now Shinwoo says Rai cannot just watch the play again. Ikun says Shinwoo is correct, so he'll teach Rai how to play and tells Rai to play with them. Rai turns the computer on, and as he sees them playing last time, Ikun tells him to get into the position, and Shinwoo tells Rai that he looks pretty good. Ikun guides Rai to use the mouse with his right hand and left click to attack, and if he sees an enemy, he has to shoot after he gets him lined up with the red cross zone in the middle. Shinwoo tells them to get started so he'll teach Rai in the actual game 1-to-1. Ikun says Shinwoo is not in a position to teach anyone, and Rai seems to know nothing about video games, so he needs more serious teachings. But Shinwoo says listening to the explanations does not help at all, and he'll get better as he plays it. Shinwoo gets back to his seat, and when Yuna tells him to take care of the Rai, Shinwoo tells her not to worry and that he'll teach him a good lesson. The game starts, and Shinwoo immediately kills Rai in the game, but Ikun tells him to go easy on Rai as he is new. Shinwoo again kills Rai in the games, although Yuna and Ikun told him to go easy on Rai. But Shinwoo, while laughing, apologizes and says he got carried away. Ikun thinks it would be better for Rai to play a 1-to-1 game with Yuna because it's her first time, too. But when Rai again loses against Yuna, Shinwoo makes fun of him. Shinwoo says Rai can't kill Yuna even once, and he is too bad for a new player. But Yuna did great, though it was her first time, and Rai feels embarrassed. After they walk home from the internet cafe, the other vampires are watching them from a rooftop, and they decide to look closer at their entertainment. Meanwhile, Shinwoo is mocking Rai, saying that today's game was a stress releaser, and all of the humiliation he has experienced from Ikun and the games has flown away. Ikun tells Rai not to worry because everyone is terrible when they first start, but Shinwoo says Yuna did great by brutalizing Rai without dying once. Suddenly, they see those two vampires standing before them and feel those guys ahead are giving them a strange feeling. The vampires walk past them, and one of them feels something weird when he passes beside Rai. Suddenly, when Shinwoo tells his friends that those guys look familiar, the vampires hear that, and they wonder if Shinwoo noticed them last time. But when Shinwoo says the big guy looks like their homeroom teacher, the vampires feel relieved. The gray-haired vampire asks the other why the stupid vampire hasn't arrived, to which the huge vampire replies that he gave an order to that vampire after they found these kids, but he gets furious because that vampire has not arrived yet. Meanwhile, Shinwoo says it's lunchtime, and they decide to get some burgers because it's still daytime and the weather is nice. On the other hand, the vampire living under the sewer is wondering what he should do because he can't get out in the sun. At night, when this vampire comes out from the sewers, the giant vampire tells him that he found that kid's address, the one he wants to kill the most. The big vampire tells the newly shifted vampire that the kid is all his, and as for the other kids, it's up to him to figure out where they are and take care of them. The giant vampire says it's this vampire's last chance, and if he can't stop fooling around and take care of the business, he'll end his miserable life. On the other hand, Frankenstein tells Rai that he believes the perpetrator of the homicide incident is the man Rai and the children met because, according to his sources, the victim's corpse had almost no blood left. Frankenstein says the scene of the murder was not that far from where Rai and the kids went into that man, and says he also kept an eye on the corpse for a while. But the corpse never changed or showed abnormalities. Suddenly, Rai tells Frankenstein that he experienced death today, and Frankenstein gets shocked and asks what his master means. Rai says the kids took him to a dark place called an internet cafe. It was his first time experiencing powerlessness, and that it encompassed his entire being. Frankenstein understands he is talking about games but wonders how to console Rai. On the other hand, the gray-haired vampire says who would have thought that the useless fool came up with a fun idea. The vampire says it'll be interesting to wait and see what happens because there is a special kind of fear that comes from someone with a grudge against the person coming to find where the person lives, and the kid probably felt something off about this vampire when they first met. They are interested to see what that useless vampire can do, and that vampire is sure to give Shinwoo a painful death. The next day, Shinwoo shows his friends the bag he left during their encounter with that weird guy and tells them it was left in front of his house. Shinwoo tells them that he left his home to leave for school, but suddenly, after he sees his bag lying outside, he is happy to see it because he thought he had lost it and would never find it again. Iken says it does look like Shinwoo's bag but asks if Shinwoo is sure it's his bag, to which Shinwoo replies he is confident because all his stuff is in there, but only one thing is missing. Meanwhile, the vampire living in the sewers has Shinwoo's book, and he thinks he'll let Shinwoo taste the fear and suffocate in his terror. On the contrary, Iken thinks something is off because Shinwoo lost his bag while Yuna was getting attacked by the weird man. Iken remembers Shinwoo throwing his bag after hearing Yuna's scream, which Iken then picked up while following him, but then he put it down to help Yuna, and he couldn't pick it back up when they were running away. Iken says after a few days, Shinwoo found his bag on his doorstep, meaning someone had to have brought it and left it there. Iken wonders how they discovered it was Shinwoo's bag and where he lives, and suggests they should tell the chairman about this. After they tell Frankenstein, he thinks it's less of a warning and more of a signal of becoming a hunt done to enjoy a prey's fear. The students are worried, and Frankenstein thinks to have failed at the hunt and even left witnesses. It probably means that the guy is not just going to let things go, and this is what Frankenstein was worried about. Frankenstein knows since Shinwoo's father is abroad, he lives alone, so he tells him not to go home for the time being, and Shinwoo says he can stay at Iken's place for a while. When Iken asks if they should report this to the police, Frankenstein replies if they do, the police won't take the precautions they need or want. Frankenstein says they can give their testimonies to the police as witnesses, but the police can't protect them simply because they found a lost bag. Frankenstein tells the students he'll inform the police through his connections so they don't have to worry about it much, but he is saying this to keep them calm, and there is nothing that ordinary police would be able to do. Frankenstein thinks he cannot sit back anymore as the students have been marked as prey. At night, the vampire is waiting outside Shinwoo's house when the guard arrives and asks who he is because he doesn't look like a tenant. But suddenly, the vampire attacks the guard. The following day, the two vampires discuss that it seems like Shinwoo decided to stay low instead of returning to his house, and he is probably terrified for his own life now. The gray-haired vampire says it's pretty fun to play cat and mouse with the prey, but the other vampire is worried that the foolish vampire hunted another human instead of that kid, and although he covered up the corpse, soon it will be discovered. The gray-haired vampire says it doesn't matter and it's about time that Vampire hunts again, because when the kid hears about this incident, they'll become terrified. The giant vampire agrees and says he'll look for other kids for entertainment, although it's bothersome. On the contrary, Frankenstein tells Rai that a security guard from the apartment complex that Shinwoo lives in went missing last night. The body hasn't been found yet, but judging by the blood nearby, it looks like he was murdered. Frankenstein thinks the vampire is looking for Shinwoo but kills the security guard. When Shinwoo is not discovered, it becomes inevitable that the children are being targeted, and the vampire has no intention of stopping the hunt. In the evening, Yuna sees she has run out of juice, but she remembers Shinwoo and Iken told her to stay home. But she thinks many people are out and about on the streets, so going out for a bit should be fine because it's still early in the evening. Yuna goes to the convenience store, but the vampires are following her. On the other hand, Frankenstein tells Rai that after Rai's disappearance, he started to live life secretively while searching for the master, and he hid his movements as much as possible to protect himself from being noticed before he found Rai. Frankenstein says though Rai has returned, it is still essential for them to maintain the secrecy of their identities because they don't know what happened to Rai, so they must be cautious. Rai agrees with him but says they know children have become targets, and suddenly, he, after reading the notes on becoming the master of online games that Frankenstein prepared for him, puts them on the table. Meanwhile, Shinwoo, while resting at Iken's home, tells him to prepare some ramyeon for him because he is hungry. But Iken says he recently had a burger. Suddenly, Shinwoo turns on a news channel in which it is reported that a guard, Master Lee, of an apartment went missing, and Iken tells Shinwoo that's where Shinwoo lives. According to another guard, the reporter says Lee didn't return after petrol, and blood assumed to be that of Mr. Lee was found in the emergency staircase. Shinwoo immediately calls Yuna, but someone else on the opposite side picks up the call and tells Shinwoo he has excellent timing. Shinwoo gets worried for Yuna, so he asks that person who he is and why he has Yuna's phone, to which that person replies that Shinwoo should calm down because the phone owner is fine for now. When Shinwoo asks what that person wants, the vampire says he is allowing him to come and save the girl just like the last time he did a few days ago. The vampire tells Shinwoo that he can contact the police if he wants, but he won't stop, and if Shinwoo does this, the girl dies. Shinwoo immediately rushes to save Yuna, and when Iken suggests contacting the police, Shinwoo says they cannot do that because Yuna will die. Iken remembers the chairman told him to give him a call if something happens, so he immediately calls Frankenstein and tells him everything. On the other hand, Yuna is held hostage at a construction site, and 2 hours ago, when Yuna was going home after getting juice, suddenly the huge vampire appeared and hypnotized her, so she lost consciousness. When Yuna wakes up, she can't understand why she suddenly lost consciousness, but when the vampires arrive, she asks them why they brought her there and what they want. The gray-haired vampire tells her to shut up and says she is being so loud that it makes him want to kill her. Yuna starts crying. But suddenly, Shinwoo and Iken arrive there to save her, and the vampire, after seeing them, says they immediately arrived after his phone call. The gray-haired vampire says one has not come, but it's not a problem and asks whether they should get started. Shinwoo recognizes that they are the people they see on the street. He thought it was the guy who attacked Yuna a few days ago, but now he wonders who these people are. Shinwoo is relieved to see Yuna is not hurt and asks the guys their reason for doing this. The vampire says Shinwoo has probably guessed already, but he should see himself, and suddenly, the other vampire appears from behind the gray-haired vampire. Yuna, Shinwoo, and Iken are shocked to see the man who attacked Yuna, and Iken thinks as he expected. This guy is the murderer and he is trying to get rid of witnesses. The vampire says they prepared this meeting to give them all a generous offer to protect themselves from the guy who attacked Yuna, and they won't interfere with them. Iken asks how they can trust them if they defend themselves against that guy. The other two will no longer come after them. The other vampires laugh and say they wouldn't have gone through all this trouble if Shinwoo and Iken couldn't, and say they could kill them anytime. The gray-haired vampire says if they disagree, they should die and tells the pale vampire to attack them. So Shinwoo gets ready to fight that guy. Shinwoo runs towards the vampire who attacked Yuna, starts throwing punches at him, and hits him with a strong kick, which relieves Yuna and Iken. Shinwoo brags about his skills, but suddenly, when the vampire gets back on his feet, Shinwoo gets shocked and thinks every attack landed solidly. Still, that guy is standing as if nothing happened. Shinwoo says that guy won't give up quickly, so he starts punching that guy again. and when that guy grabs Shinwoo's arm, Shinwoo with his elbow blows that guy's face. Suddenly, that guy furiously tries to hit Shinwoo, but Shinwoo barely dodges it and gets a scratch on his face. Shinwoo thinks this guy would have fainted, but to see him counterattack, Shinwoo understands his attacks are not working, so he wonders if this guy is a monster. Meanwhile, Frankenstein and Rai also arrive at the construction where Yuna and everyone are. Shinwoo thinks this guy feels no impact with ordinary moves, so he decides to restrict his movements and twist his arm backward, but suddenly, the vampire slams Shinwoo away with his full strength. Ikun and Yuna get worried, and Shinwoo wonders how a person can do that from that position, and thinks this guy is powerful. Shinwoo sees the guy doesn't even seem to care that his arm is hurt, and when Shinwoo asks the guy if his arm doesn't hurt, the gray-haired vampire thinks Shinwoo is better than he thought. The giant vampire says he would like to take Shinwoo around because he wonders how Shinwoo would change, and the other vampire thinks it's a great idea. Suddenly, those vampires feel someone is releasing their energy and are not shy about it, so they wonder who it can be, and as that guy is calling them, they decide to respond. The vampire goes after the energy to see who is there, and suddenly Frankenstein appears behind them, asking them to choose whether they'll die there or disappear without making a fuss. The vampires got caught from behind, and they knew if Frankenstein had attacked without talking, they would have been killed. The vampire wonders who this guy is to have such energy and asks who that guy is, but Rai replies they don't deserve to ask questions. The gray-haired vampire says to think in a place like this, there would be two beings able to pressure them to this degree, and they believe there is no question they'll lose at this rate. Still, they decide to fight. The gray-haired vampire tries to attack Frankenstein, but he swiftly dodges the attack. When the huge vampire punches Rai, the dust appears, and they think they defeated one. The gray-haired vampire tells Frankenstein it looks easier than he thought and thinks Frankenstein may be strong but is confident that he and his fellow vampire can take care of Frankenstein quickly. The gray-haired vampire tells Frankenstein to come at him and ask why he is standing, but he is shocked to see Rai is alright, and that he stopped the giant vampire's punch with his palm. The two vampires can't understand how it's possible, and Rai makes the big vampire kneel before him. Suddenly, Frankenstein attacks the gray-haired vampire's arms from behind and says it's humiliating to dare to look away while facing him. Frankenstein severely wounds the gray-haired vampire, and that vampire wonders where such influential figures have been hiding all this time and recognizes Rai as one of those students. Frankenstein will kill the gray-haired vampire, but suddenly Rai stops him because they are going back and Rai leaves the room. Frankenstein knows their master's orders are absolute, and he must have reasons, so he also leaves while telling the gray-haired vampire that he knows what to do if he doesn't want to die there. The vampire replies he is not stupid and knows he has no choice and is stressed because he knows those guys can kill him anytime. Suddenly, the vampire says he has a hard time believing that Frankenstein and his friend would let them go with just their word. But Frankenstein says if he wants to find out, perhaps they should try it again. Because of this, both the vampires start trembling with fear. After leaving the room, Rai suddenly feels dizzy, and Frankenstein asks if Rai is alright and if the master is suffering from the side effects of having slept for too long. Rai says it's true but says his buttons are off and starts closing his coat buttons. Frankenstein knows Master hates being untidy and gets emotional thinking about Master wearing an unbuttoned suit. How shocking it must have been. On the other hand, Shinwoo notices the other two guys are not present there and wonders where they disappeared. Shinwoo sees the guy he is fighting is not moving because his fellow two guys are gone. Frankenstein doesn't know the reason, but he knows this is their chance, so he tells Ikun to bring Yuna, and Ikun runs towards Yuna. The vampire tries to go after Ikun, but Shinwoo stops him and says he won't let him interfere. On the other hand, the huge vampire tells his friend that he doesn't know what happened because his body automatically moved when that vampire told him to kneel. The gray-haired vampire wonders where those monsters come from, as they have never even heard about such powerful beings. They decide to retreat because they don't need to risk their lives for a bit of entertainment and think they are simply lucky those vampires chose to leave. The giant vampire sends a message of retreat to the vampire fighting Shinwoo, but when he tries to resist, the big vampire sends a furious message if he disobeys him, he'll kill him, so the vampire starts to walk away. Shinwoo and Ikun are shocked to see this, and Ikun tells Shinwoo he doesn't know why that guy is leaving, but they need to get Yuna out of there first. Shinwoo says he is right, and while they help Yuna get up, Frankenstein and Rai arrive. When Frankenstein asks if they are all fine, the kids get happy to see the chairman. After returning home, Frankenstein tells Rai that he has had the children sent some, and they decided to stay at Yuna's place for now because they are still worried about what happened. Frankenstein informs that police also set up a perimeter around Yuna's house because it is undeniable that she was kidnapped. Frankenstein doesn't think those vampires meant to kill the children because the children would not have been unharmed if those guys had made a move directly. When Frankenstein says there is something off about those vampires' energy, Rye agrees and tells him they are beings that can't belong anywhere, and that's what he felt from them. On the other hand, the big vampire asks the gray-haired about his wounds, to which he replies that it's weird because they are not healing correctly and thinks Frankenstein's power is interfering with his regeneration. When the big vampire asks who the gray-haired thinks those guys are, he replies that he doesn't know, but one thing is bothering him. The gray-haired man says that his friend could not move at one word of that vampire, making him realize that the big vampire also has the power to affect minds. The giant vampire understands that the gray-haired is trying to say that the vampire dominated his mind, and the gray-haired says it takes a massive toll on his friend to make contact with another mind. The giant vampire gets shocked that his ability is at a level that can't even be counted as affecting another's mind, and that's when his opponent's mental defenses are low. The gray-haired says there is a famous story among humans that vampires dominate the minds of humans to lure them into hunting, and made-up stories told by humans sometimes turn out to be true. The giant vampire thinks his friend is overreacting, but his friend replies that the big vampire can also control the minds of those whose blood he consumes because they are the source of his ability. The gray-haired man says it wouldn't be strange if those vampires were capable of dominating minds, and if they are nobles who are called nobles and rule over their kind, then it's big news. When his friend asks if they report this to the elders, the gray hair says they don't need to because if the people on top find out they are holding such information, they won't let them be. Meanwhile, two other vampires are watching them, and they wonder what the other two vampires are doing in a place like that without reporting. The next day, Shinwoo and Iken wake up at Yuna's house, and Iken tells Yuna that her mother seemed surprised when they just showed up suddenly last night. Yuna says her mother was surprised when the two said they would like to sleep, but she told her it reminded her of old times and laughed it off. Yuna thanks them for not telling her mom and says she should probably let her know, but she knows her mother will be worried. Suddenly, Shinwoo says isn't it amazing that they don't have to go to school because Frankenstein told them to rest at home. After all, they have been through a lot. Shinwoo says he is bored now and wonders what the others think Rai is up to which Yuna replies he should be resting as well. Shinwoo suggests they should call him because if the three of them are bored together, they should imagine Rai by himself. But Iken says he doesn't have Rai's phone number, and suddenly, he wonders if Rai even has a cell phone. Shinwoo says there is always a way and calls Frankenstein, making him wonder if something happened again. But after informing the chairman that they are going over to hang out with Rai, Shinwoo shuts the phone. Meanwhile, Frankenstein is in a meeting, and Park thinks it looks serious because the chairman picked up a call in a meeting. On the contrary, the vampires who were watching the gray-haired and his friend last night arrive where they are, ask if they have the time to loiter in a place like this and call the gray-haired M21 and the big vampire M24. Simultaneously, Shinwoo and his friends go to meet Rai and tell him to open the door, but Rai doesn't know how to do that while Shinwoo tells him to open it quickly. On the other hand, when M21 asks the other vampires what they are doing there, they reply that as M21 failed to make any reports about the missing coffin, the big shots would get antsy, so they sent them over. The vampire asks M21 why they must clean his mess, and the lady vampire says they heard some interesting stories about the corpse with no blood left after they got here. Her fellow vampire asks M24 if he is the one who did that and says he should not eat whenever he is hungry and gets mad that they neglected their duties and made a mess of things instead. M24 says they caught the guy who stole the coffin but couldn't locate the coffin, so they had no choice but to do that. The other vampire gets furious to hear that they couldn't find the coffin, so they suck the blood of the guy who stole it. M21 says they were trying to use that guy to find the coffin, and if that guy goes out searching for it himself, his collaborators might show up, and he was the dead man anyway, so they thought it would not be a problem if they took care of him in this way. The other vampire says even so, they won't be able to avoid responsibility for this incident. And when the girl asks what the wounds on the arms of M21 are, he replies they had a violent run-in with unknowns while tracking the coffin. When the girl asks if they could get any information on them, M21 tells her they found nothing concrete so far, and there were 10 of them, all obviously trained systematically. The vampire says, as expected, there are others, but to have been able to deal with prototype experiments like M21 and M24, an organization like that should not have too much power. When that vampire says he can clean them out and return, M24 gets furious, but M21 tells him to control himself. Meanwhile, Frankenstein gets a call from Officer Kim, who says one of Frankenstein's neighbors reported suspicious figures loitering in front of his house just a while ago, and they were attempting to climb the wall when their dispatch got there, so they took them in. The officer tells the suspects that they have personal relations with the chairman and tells him that their investigation found that they were students from his school. Officer Kim thinks it's a deliberate attempt to break into the chairman's house, especially since it's a school day, and they are not at school. After some while, the students are sitting inside the chairman's house, and Shinwoo says his neck is still hurting because of the headlock by the police officer, and he cannot believe Rai doesn't know how to open the door. Suddenly, Shinwoo says, as things are fine now, they should get started, and Ikun immediately takes out their laptops and says they prepared this for Rai. Ikun tells Rai that they will play the game they played last time and thinks it'll be a bit more uncomfortable to play on a laptop, but it'll still be enough for Rai to have fun. Ikun tells Rai to be better prepared for today, but suddenly Rai gets up and gives them a smile, which shocks everyone, and Ikun immediately realizes that Rai has been practicing. Shinwoo tells Ikun to immediately set everything up to see how much Rai has improved, and Ikun tells Yuna to be aware because Rai seems pretty confident. On the other hand, the guy and his fellow girl vampire decide to investigate on their own and ask M24 about where the guy he drank from is, to which M24 replies he might be hiding out near a hospital's blood bank or some such and probably come crawling out soon enough once the night falls. After they left, M24 says he cut off his connections with that vampire so the other vampires wouldn't be able to track his movements anymore, and he would be able to control the guy he turned into a vampire. M21 says they can't want their abilities to be discovered, and the other vampires can never know that incomplete specimens like them have started to develop powers they don't have. After some while, when Frankenstein goes home, he wonders why the lights are off and apologizes to his master because he arrived late due to issues he had to take care of. Suddenly, Frankenstein notices some gloomy, dark energy from his master and wonders what could have brought him down to such sadness. At night, the vampire in the hospital's blood bank drinks all the blood and is mad at Shinwoo, and when he says he'll kill him, the other vampires suddenly arrive and ask whom he will kill. The vampire gets startled, and when he shows his fangs, the other vampire says how dare he bare his fangs against him and asks if he wants to die. The guy says this vampire has good manners and knocked out the security guard instead of killing him. However, he thinks this vampire is confused and asks if he believes he is still a human because he left a perfect prayer and satisfied himself with blood packs. The guy asks the new vampire if he is listening to the orders from the person who put him in such a state and says it's ridiculous because the vampire doesn't need to restrain himself. He tells the new vampire to feast as he wants to kill as he wants, and he can do as he pleases, which makes the vampire happy. But suddenly, the stronger vampire grabs this weak vampire's neck and asks him first to tell what has been going on. Meanwhile, M21 and M24 know the other vampires must have found the new vampire by now because there is only one blood bank nearby, and M21 says he doesn't know if it's a coincidence that the assassination agents were sent here instead of regular agents. Simultaneously, the girl vampire tells her fellow that causing a scene is not good, but he replies he is not the one who created this vampire. The other two prototypes have to take responsibility for whatever happens. The vampire says he doesn't know why the higher-ups are leaving such useless experiments, and all he has done is give the higher-ups an excellent reason to clean out the trash. He made that newly transformed vampire kill all the night staff in the hospital to blame those prototypes, and the next day there was news everywhere about this incident. Shinwoo and Frankenstein watch the news that during a sudden and local blackout, many General Hospital employees and patients are brutally murdered. Investigations are still underway to locate the survivors, and the police have devoted all their workforce to investigating the incident. Meanwhile, all the students in the school are discussing this incident. Everyone is scared and wonders what kind of lunatic does this. Ikun tells Shinwoo that it's obvious, and Shinwoo says he also guesses it's the same guy. Ikun says something was off about those people and says he thought they were related to the first homicide case since the kidnapped Yuna, but something was strange about the way they backed off last time. Ikun feels for a case this large to happen afterward. He cannot help but think they were the ones who did it, and Shinwoo is worried about what's going on. Suddenly, Park arrives and says it's obvious the students heard the news, and it's hard for him to believe as well because it's a place he also visits frequently. Park says it's clear those are all cases of homicide, and considering the proximity of their school to these cases and their scale, the school has decided to close down the campus until things are calmer. park advises the students not to be out and about at night and to stay at home, as it may feel a bit stuffy to them. But they should try not to go out during the day as well, and hopes to see them all again safe and healthy. Meanwhile, M21 and M24 discuss the city's chaos, and that the other two vampires are insane. M21 says those vampires know better than anyone else that the higher-ups don't want to cause any scene, and what they just did has nothing to do with why they were sent here, and they will let them take the fall for all this. On the other hand, Frankenstein calls Shinwoo and his friends to his office and says they cannot be sure if the person they encountered last time is responsible for last night's incident. Frankenstein says Yuna and Iken's house is safe, but now they know where they live, so he tells Shinwoo to spend a while at Iken's place and stops Shinwoo from climbing over his walls and not hanging up right after saying what he wants to say. After some while, when M21 and M24 meet Jake and Marie and tell them that they have made matters worse, Jake replies he doesn't know what they mean. M24 says, wiping out an entire hospital in the city's center, they were the ones who made a fuss over them, causing a scene earlier and asking them what they were thinking. Jake replies they didn't do that, but the scumbag the other vampires created did this, and they didn't even lift a finger. Marie asked M21 and M24 if she heard they left out some witnesses who could identify them, to which M21 replied he couldn't say they saw them, nor did they witness the infected vampire killing someone, and they were just passing by. When M21 says there have been many such people in the past, Marie says that is not all, and they were not just passing by, they were humans that the infected were hunting and failed to kill. Marie asks if they were planning to kill the witnesses, then why they let them go when they had the chance to get rid of them, to which M21 replies he already told her they didn't witness anything, and there was no need to make an even larger deal out of it. Jake says his excuses seem reasonable, and M21 says it's because higher-ups don't like causing scenes. But Jake says they still need to get rid of those witnesses as it's better to be safe than sorry. On the other hand, Frankenstein tells Rye that he failed to find any incriminating evidence at the hospital, and he believes it is likely that the ones they met earlier are related to this incident. Frankenstein is said to have committed such acts without caring about causing a scene. People like those vampires may ignore their warnings and target the children again. Frankenstein fears they will immediately locate the school because of the uniform, and it won't be Shinwoo and his friends. But the entire student body will be in danger, so he tells Rye that he'll make the first move. Before leaving, Frankenstein informs Rye that he'll be on his way, but Rye tells him that those vampires must have a plan because they still made a move after they warned them. Rye tells Frankenstein that he'll be waiting for him, and Frankenstein leaves after that. On the other hand, the infected vampire takes Jake and Marie to one of the witnesses' houses, but suddenly, some boys stop them and start passing comments on Marie. They offer Marie to come with them and tell Jake to buzz off because he is too old to get into ugly situations. But Jake asks who these punks are. Those boys start laughing that Jake is playing hard, but when Jake says he'll eat them, those guys get scared and try to walk away. But the infected attacks them. Meanwhile, M24 says he expects that Jake will blame everything on them, and M21 says they are underestimating them and probably want them to attack back. M21 knows they can't fight James and Marie back because they are elites of the organization, and he can guarantee it is Jake alone doing all this. M21 knows Marie dislikes them as well, but she wouldn't go this far because of that. And M24 says Jake would not be safe either if the organization found out. M21 says Jake's first massacre was at the organization and says a lab created Jake as they know him now, and it is a secret lab funded by the organization, defended by over 100 agents. The organization's 100 soldiers trained thoroughly could not stop Jake, including the researchers. There were 138 people in the lab, but there were no survivors. When M24 asks why Jake did that, M21 tells Jake they hurt him a bit during the experiment. M24 understands if that is the case, then the organization would not care much if they found out about this case. M21 thinks it's for the better because if they mess with the students, those nobles will likely reappear, and it won't be an easy match for Jake and Marie. Suddenly, Yuna's phone rings, which M24 took from her when they kidnapped her, and when he picks up, it turns out to be a call from a loan company. On the contrary, when Jake and Marie reach outside the housing society of Shinwoo, suddenly, guards arrive and ask for their identification. When the guard notices blood on the infected vampire's clothes, they take out their guns and tell them not to move. The guard says there is an unprecedented serial killer recently on the loose, and considering the nature of the case, they are allowed to use firearms from the beginning when apprehending suspects. When the guard says it'll be better for them to comply without resisting, Jake says he'll handle this quietly, but suddenly Marie feints those guards and tells Jake to stop because the higher-ups won't be happy with the mess he has already made and they won't sit if he touches the police as well. Jake says it's okay, and this is all because of the infected walking around with blood splattered all over him and says he made a mess right before. Suddenly, Frankenstein arrives there, and Jake says it'll be hard to keep things as quiet as Marie wants. Frankenstein thinks someone else keeps showing up, sees the police officers are knocked unconscious in front of them, and thinks they also have others involved. Jake tells the infected to finish this handsome guy, and Frankenstein responds that he doesn't know how to feel about that statement, but he'll take it as a compliment. Jake thinks this guy has not yet grasped the situation and does not panic even after seeing the unconscious officers. Perhaps he is hiding something. Jake says why don't they find out what this guy is hiding, so when the stupid vampire tries to attack Frankenstein, he grabs that vampire by his neck and says he prefers his clothes saliva-free. When Frankenstein sees blood stains on that guy's clothes, he wonders if he attacked someone else because the police officers are okay. Jake says he made a mistake. He assumed Frankenstein was just a show-off, but when he asks if Frankenstein is the one who took the thing, Frankenstein leaves that vampire and thinks he must have mistaken him for someone else. Jake says he is looking for him, and Frankenstein believes he can gain some information if he plays alone, so he asks why Jake is after him. Jake tells him not to play innocent and asks him where the coffin is, which makes Frankenstein wonder if they have something to do with the coffin his master was in and if the things happening around there are related to his master. Jake says Frankenstein probably came there to lead them to the casket, but when Frankenstein tells them to change location, Jake laughs and asks if he is worried about causing a scene. Jake says it's an interesting suggestion, but he doesn't think there is a need for that and says he won't be causing a scene getting rid of a small fry like him. Marie tells Jake they need this guy alive to interrogate, and there are too many people there, so she also suggests changing the location. Meanwhile, while waiting for Frankenstein, Rye suddenly gets up to go out, but he remembers he still hasn't learned how to open the door, so he thinks he must use the window. After changing the location, when Jake asks Frankenstein if this is good enough, Frankenstein replies he would like to suggest that if he captures Jake, he would like for him to answer his questions without Frankenstein having to interrogate him. Frankenstein says he'll do the same if they catch him because none of them wants to waste time. But Jake replies it's not funny anymore and is irritating. Jake says he'll make Frankenstein beg for his life and rushes to attack him, but he dodges the attack. And when Jake tries to hit him again, Frankenstein, with his powers, immediately slashes Jake's chest. Marie and the infected are shocked to see Jake's wounds, and Frankenstein says he still has not heard Jake's answer. Jake admits he overestimated his opponent and says Frankenstein had the right to make such an offer. When Frankenstein asks if he should be flattered, Jake tries to attack him again. But Frankenstein moves aside, and Jake destroys the pillar instead. Frankenstein feels his movements have changed, and Jake starts to shoot with his full strength, but he cannot hit Frankenstein and says he is becoming more and more enjoyable. Frankenstein notices Jake's arms have transformed, and Jake says it's been a long time since he has taken this form, so he can't control his strength and lacks accuracy. Frankenstein thinks it's a fantastic transformation, to which Jake replies it's an amazing transformation as this form proves that he is a truly evolved human. Jake says his arms have made him so much more than those bugs outside and says this form is what humans wanted for a long time. Marie tells Jake to stop talking, hurry up, and finish it, so Jake thinks it won't be like earlier when he couldn't even control his attacks and rushes toward Frankenstein to attack him. On the other hand, while trying to open the windows, Rye fails and breaks the handle. Frankenstein still dodges Jake's attacks, furiously attacks Jake again, and destroys his arms with severe wounds. Marie is shocked to see transformed Jake so helpless, and Jake can't understand what is happening to his body. When Frankenstein is about to finish Jake, suddenly Marie steps in, and when Jake tells her she doesn't need to step in, Marie says he cannot handle this in his current condition. Jake feels his body is not recovering, and Marie also notices that not even the wounds from the first Jake took to his chest are healing, making her wonder who Frankenstein is. Suddenly, Marie says they are retreating, but Jake asks if she will let that guy go, to which Marie replies that it is not part of her duties for this mission. Frankenstein asks if it is safe to say it's his turn for some answers, but while leaving, Marie says she never accepted that, and he can consider Jake babbling his mouth as his answer. After they go, Frankenstein sees his sleeve is torn and remembers it happened when Marie interfered. After some while, when Marie returns with Jake, M21 is shocked to see Jake has been done in, and after seeing Jake's wounds, He understands it was the same guy from the last time. When M21 asks what happened, Jake furiously kicks the infected vampire away, and Marie says Jake lost, and that's all there is to it. M21 thinks it seems like they are even more potent than he thought, and he hoped they would be a match for Jake and Marie. But to think they would win so obviously, Jake and Marie can't know they already knew about it. M21 shockingly asks if Marie is telling him that there are people who can fight them, but Marie replies only Jake fought because her duty doesn't involve combat. When Marie asks if M21 has met that guy before, he is shocked that there was only one opponent, not two, and when Marie tells him it was a blonde guy, M21 learns that the other guy didn't show up. M21 tells her they would not be alive right now if they met someone who could beat Jake. Meanwhile, Jake feels immense pain and thinks he'll not let that guy get away with this, but he needs more power. On the other hand, Frankenstein returns, notices something is bothering Rye, and wonders if something happened while he was gone. Frankenstein sees the window handle and understands what happened, but suddenly, when Rye notices Frankenstein's torn sleeve, he gets up and pats Frankenstein's shoulder. Frankenstein tells Rye that his opponents are humans and he cannot be sure of others' involvement, but these humans seem to have something to do with Rye's coffin. Frankenstein says he believes further investigation is necessary, but when Rye asks what happened to his shirt, Frankenstein says that these new figures he met were not ordinary humans. They were humans, but much more powerful. Frankenstein says they seem to have been created by other humans, and Rye says humans have always wished for more power. Frankenstein agrees that humans have conducted many experiments in the pursuit of power in the past but have just now succeeded. When Rye asks if the two they met were humans, Frankenstein says he is unsure, but assumes other humans also created them. Rye says this was why he sensed strange feelings at their meeting, and Frankenstein also thinks that his master said they belong nowhere because they were mere experiments. On the other hand, when M24 feels pain in his heart, he takes some pills, but when M21 feels worried for him, M24 tells him not to look concerned. Meanwhile, Jake calls them defective prototypes, and when he asks how long M24 can go without meds, M21 gets furious at him. Jake asks if he wants to fight because M21 has a chance as he is in this condition and says he is right. This may be his best chance to take on him. Jake asks M21 what he is waiting for, but M24 stops M21 from fighting. M21 and M24 leave from there, and Jake says they don't even dare to attack first, but they still leave quietly. Marie tells Jake they are also leaving because they need more intel for the mission. They need to gather more information about the organization they are after and the person who put him in this state. Marie tells Jake he has no choice in this matter, and they are retreating to the laboratory in Korea because he should get treated for his injuries first. Marie says Dr. Cromwell is there right now and should be able to treat Jake's injuries with no problem. Still, when Jake asks why one of the top bioengineering doctors of their organization is in such a place, Marie says they should know that they are not authorized to know things like that. Marie says they need more intel on the man they encountered and whether it's his natural ability, or he is using something to suppress Jake's healing power, and whether